Please welcome to the stage Patrick Tucker, Science and Technology Editor for Defense One, Dr. Frank Peterkin, the Principal Director for Directed Energy at the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Critical Technologies at the Department of Defense, and Jarrett LaFleur, Senior Advisor to the Principal Director for Hypersonics for Strike System Strategy and Policy at the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering at the Department of Defense.
Okay, thank you. 5 Types of Rust, it sort of sounds like a country metal fusion band, so maybe I will go ahead and hit that up. Sorry to Kevin that I mangled his story a little bit. Sometimes our misplaced trust in people gets in the way of building trust with AI, so appreciate the correction there. We always do appreciate our corrections. With me today, Frank and Jarrett, and hypersonics and directed energy. And the reason that I've stuck these guys together is because in talking about the nature of technological innovation, there's this tremendous inclination to really highlight how information technology makes everything faster, makes everything better. And we're going to have a panel later on that really talks about how information acceleration is changing the nature of biotechnology and, of course, quantum computing and opening that up. But there are a couple of problems where information acceleration can play a role. But ultimately, we are talking about the laws of thermodynamics. There are hard challenges. There are hard problems that, and these are also problems that there might be some dual use or commercial technology companies out there that are have some interesting things to contribute, but this has to be DoD-led. Directed energy and hypersonics. Your government is working on the hard physics challenge to bring to life technologies that have never existed before. And so with that, Frank, I'll start with you. Yes, directed energy. I go to the Hill sometimes, and I watch on the Hill General Kurilla out of CENTCOM talk with lawmakers, and lawmakers ask General Kurilla last few times he's been there, what technologies do we have other than $20 million standard missiles to shoot down $20,000 Iranian drones? And he says, I really hope that we get some directed energy solutions in theater to help with that. It's been about 10 years since I first wrote about a directed energy solution that was deployed aboard the USS Ponce. Tremendous appetite, need for next generation directed energy solutions. What is coming in the near future that you can talk about? And can you talk a little bit about help us manage expectations here in terms of the challenge of this space?
So first, thanks to Tech One for the opportunity to get in front of the audience. Thanks for the opportunity, Patrick, to have the chat. I love the example of the USS Ponce for this conversation. I worked for the Navy for nearly 30 years before coming to work for Mr. Holliday in critical technologies. I had a front row seat to what happened with the system, the USS Ponce, the laser on the USS Ponce. And it had all the characteristics then of what we still have to deal with today. It had a hard technology problem. It had an industrial base and a government workforce that had worked on the problem for a while, kind of out of view. It had leadership through the CNO, Admiral Greenert at the time, who saw an opportunity, saw a challenge, took some risk. It had politics. Senator John Warner at the time from Virginia put some money in budgets that wasn't expected to be there. And then the Navy was willing to take on all the challenges. And we just had policy changes in the DoD that allowed us to actually field weapons. So we did it. We pushed it on the ship 10 years ago, like you say, and then it from outside perspectives, it appears like it all tailed away. But if you really take a look at the timelines, that laser was on the ship till about 2017. And as it was coming off, the next generation of activity was already starting to ramp up. Mm-hmm. Critical technologies became a thing at the OSD-R&E level. The laser technologies that are necessary to support these missions advanced significantly through industrial and commercial investments. Policy continued to evolve, so it was clear we could, in fact, field these kinds of weapons. So today, we had one laser in the 2014 timeframe. We're north of 20-ish that have been fielded by all the services in the last 5 years, primarily for the mission that I think a lot of people are noticing today, which is counter UAV, counter UAS. That's a sweet spot, I think, in the near term for directed energy systems. We have tactical engagement opportunities. We bring a magazine that maybe isn't limitless or endless, but as long as you have electricity, you have a weapon. Mm-hmm. And so I think I heard the discussion earlier about resilient logistics. That's a logistics impact when you bring direct energy to the fight. So I think that's what's bringing us forward in the near term, is a compelling mission set, leadership that is engaged, as you said, lots of congressional questions, and technology that's ready to meet the challenge.
Where are some of these deployments right now that you can talk about? What are we learning from them in terms of what's actually like the Shahad 136s, the drones and the systems that are out in the field that are causing so much mayhem?
So specific locations are sensitive. We wouldn't talk about that, but we fight through combatant commands that are geographically identified, and direct energy systems have been deployed in multiple geographic commands today, up to today, and today they are in multiple locations. And what we learn about this, not all of it's great. We're a nascent technology, a nascent capability, so systems fail in the rugged environments that they're often put into. So maintainability, reliability, the availability of the systems when you need it, those are challenges we're living the dream right now of understanding that we have some work to do. Maybe not so much in the underlying physics, which I know that's kind of our topic, but certainly in the engineering of being more robust.
Okay, and scaling, like where are we in terms of scale?
Scaling is actually a pretty good news story. More is always better. Yeah. More power typically will affect systems more rapidly. At the OSD level, we've been leading a scaling program we call High Energy Laser Scaling Initiative, and we've advanced the power available for these kinds of systems by almost a factor of, say, 5 over what the state of the art was a few years ago. Now, those are the technology systems that aren't ready yet to be fielded, but they are already starting to go into prototype systems. So the Army, for example, is putting together a system with one of our lasers.
Awesome. So, Jarrett, let me take it over to you. Who understands what hypersonics means? Oh man. Okay. Yeah, got a couple. Sometimes, thank you, Maynard. Otherwise, we'd be in big trouble. 5 times the speed of sound. So when we talk about hypersonics, technically, even the ICBMs from the 50s were hypersonic because they traveled at that speed, but they traveled in a specific arc. It's a ballistic arc. It's a defeatable thing. You can intercept it if you have enough interceptors, or at the very least, you can sort of figure out where it's going. Russia and China have pursued a new generation of highly maneuverable hypersonics. We are pursuing a new generation of highly maneuverable hypersonics. They've been described as invincible. They are, as the Ukrainians that shot one of these down with a Patriot missile system can attest, they are in fact defeatable, but at least in that setting. But there is a tremendous interest in how quickly the United States can build these. And the United States has set itself up with a slightly higher task than Russia and China in deploying next generation hypersonics, because we have decided to deploy them with high precision as opposed to carry a nuclear warhead. So, Jarrett, upcoming milestones out of the CT. First, what do you do regarding all of the services and all of their different hypersonic activities? What is CTO's role there in shepherding the cats?
Sure. Well, so thank you for having me here today. That was a long slew of questions I could probably start to address. So I work for Dr. Weber, who's the principal director for hypersonics, right, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, particularly within the ASD for CT office. So our job in hypersonics is to set the vision and the strategy for the department, and to oversee the efficient and coordinated execution of that strategy across the department. And so, as you alluded to, our job is to move fast. Mm-hmm. Our job, come operation times, to go Mach 5 or higher. So to calibrate folks, that's roughly a mile per second. So pretty darn fast. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, we have been moving expeditiously towards getting capability fielded on land, sea, and in air. Mm-hmm. So in terms of recent accomplishments, we've done quite a bit over the past 5 years or so, mm-hmm, and that's been necessitated by the threat that our adversary has posed. Perhaps not the threat that many would initially think about, but really we think about the threat of our adversaries fielding anti-access area denial capabilities, mm-hmm, that they intend for us to keep us out of the fight, right? So what hypersonics gives us in the game is high speed, obviously, which maneuverable, as you kind of alluded to. It's more than just ballistic, and it gives us typically a long-range capability to address threats from relative sanctuary,
Right.
hundreds or thousands of miles away from the conflict.
Right. And if you look at the way the Pacific is laid out, there's a lot of islands, there's hundreds of thousands of miles. This is why this is sort of essential for what we're talking about, deterring China in the future. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we've been fielding capabilities, as I mentioned, land, sea, and air. Some of the room may have heard of the Joint Army-Navy program, the Conventional Prompt Strike System, which is a common missile and a common glide body for both the Army and the Navy. On the Navy, it'll be going into the DDG-1000 Zumwalt-class destroyers, as well as Virginia-class SSNs, or attack submarines. And on the Army, it'll be fielded in transporter erector launchers that have actually already gone to soldiers in the field. So the number of accomplishments there, among them, the common hypersonic glide body has been successfully tested. It's been transitioned from a national laboratory to industry for production. We've gotten to first flight test of the all-up-round missile within 4 years, which is pretty remarkable as defense acquisition programs go, as you might imagine. So that's Navy. That's a boost glide intermediate range vehicle for Navy and Army. The Air Force has made a number of investments as well. That includes the Air Launch Rapid Response Weapon, or ARRW, B-52 launch boost glide vehicle, which got to its first tests or successful tests within 5 years of program initiation. They're also pursuing the hypersonic attack cruise missile, which is different than the weapons I just mentioned. That is a cruise missile, so it's got powered flight throughout. And similarly, the Navy is in the early stages of its program called HALO. The acronym is a little complicated, but it's see if I get it right, the hypersonic air-launched offensive anti-surface warfare weapon. Yeah. Also a cruise missile.
Yeah. Well, don't mess with that one. Halo is easy to remember. It's like some of these things have these names, and I'm like, guys, what are you even doing? But Halo, you know what that is. It's a circle above the head of an angel, and that sounds like it sort of works with hypersonics. Long-range hypersonic weapon system. That's too hard. So I want to go back to some of the things that you just mentioned, but in terms of the Defense Department's long-range plans for hypersonics, and they are in different degrees of formality, but this is the future of this technology. Eventually, you want to get to UAVs, or reusable, right? And then potentially UAVs, and then potentially hypersonics that are capable of carrying people. And like I said, this is just where people are looking for this technology to go. When people in the Department of Defense have been talking about these applications in the future for a long time, just sort of general thoughts on the challenge area there in terms of first making a hypersonic capable UAV, and then making a hypersonic vehicle that is not a missile, but actually can carry troops from one corner of the earth to another in absolutely record time.
Certainly. So in the hypersonics PD's office, we have sort of three capability areas we talk about. First is offensive strike, which is largely what I was referring to just now. Yeah. We think about counter hypersonics, which is how do you defeat an adversary's attempt to use hypersonics against you? And the third part of our portfolio is looking at reusable hypersonics. So those are, in some ways the most sophisticated of the hypersonic systems we look at. Certainly the more futuristic, longer term objectives. So in that space, there are challenges. So when you talk about a reusable system, you have to have capabilities for propulsion at high speed, at hypersonic speeds, as well as at low speeds, because the model there would be take off and land like an airplane and cruise at Mach 5 or higher. Yeah. And so that imposes some really interesting physics demands on your system. So we use for hypersonic propulsion, you'd be using a ramjet or a scramjet. Right. Which is actually quite a remarkable piece of equipment with no moving parts, a prime candidate for things like additive manufacturing. But it doesn't work well at low speeds, right? So it works based on the ram air you're getting in the engine. And so if you have no ram air, if you have no velocity to speak of, you need some other way. You can't use your ramjet yet. Yeah. So at low speeds, you need something else. Right now, in the offensive hypersonics portfolio, the way we solve that problem is by using a rocket to boost us to hypersonic speeds. But obviously, if you're looking to do something reusable, having a particularly a solid rocket, it's not the most reusable solution, or not the most quickly reusable solution you could imagine. So, so we talk about turbine-based combined cycle engines quite a bit. So those are having a turbojet kind of sort of riding alongside your ramjet, often with a shared inlet. So there's a lot of complexity there to get you from the ground to altitude, to speed, and maintain that speed when transitioning to a ramjet or a scramjet.
Okay.
And our vision there, certainly NASA has a part of this. When you're talking, I think about perhaps visions of people traveling, really fast. That's really more within the sphere of what NASA would look at in terms of civilian applications.
Oh, but if they invented something, we would take advantage of it. Like we would figure out some way to use that thing if they did.
This is why we partner with NASA. The science and technology development between the two are, quite related. So we think of it, the potential missions in terms of things like strike, but also things like intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Think like a much higher speed version of an SR-71. And both of us think, both NASA and the Department of Defense think about responsive access to space. So certainly you can use this type of aircraft as the first stage of a 2 or more stage to orbit system.
Okay, and when do we get that?
So under active research and active development in the S&T sense, but I think we that's probably more of a 5+ to 10-year vision.
Okay. See, I asked that because obviously when we talk about the way Congress, the way lawmakers, the way the public wants these systems, they want them now, they want them yesterday, they feel like they've been funding them long enough, and yet at the same time we've gone through some of these enormous challenges that just exist that can't be easily defeated. So Frank, I want to go back to you and ask a little bit about what are the big challenges just in terms of the science that remains behind getting to large-scale deployment of very powerful directed energy that can, obviously there's the UAV application, but even other potential applications. At one point, Dr. Griffin, the former head of the former Undersecretary of Defense for Science and Technology, was looking at deploying neutral particle beams in space to literally blast missile launches using neutral particle beams. He was replaced not long after that. But what are the main physics challenges behind getting to the power and the wide-scale deployability that some people are expecting out of directed energy?
So you asked the audience if they understood hypersonics, but we never really asked whether they understand directed energy, and I'm not going to make them identify themselves. I'll just say that directed energy really is 3 categories of capability: laser weapons, RF or microwave weapons, and then, as you said, particle beam. For the most part, particularly after Dr. Griffin kind of spiked some interest in it and then it faded away, there's not a lot of investment in anything that looks like a particle beam. So if you kind of put that to the side right now, then really lasers and RF and microwave energy is where we live. And I always like to point out, especially when I'm on the stage with the hypersonics guys, that we operate at one speed, and that speed is about Mach 874,000.
Right.
And that's where a lot of the physics challenges come from. So you're wielding light, you're wielding electromagnetic energy. You have to shape that, you have to control it, and you have to understand how it interacts with targets. So on the shaping side, creating the sources for that energy is slightly different for lasers versus microwaves. And there's most of our money, most of our conversation tends to center around the laser technologies. The fundamental physical challenge there is lasers, and this is physics, are never going to be 100% efficient converting electrical energy to optical. Geeks and nerds can argue about exactly what that number is, but it's somewhere in the 40 to 50% mark. That's about as good as we're ever going to do. But we need to do as well as we can do. So that's part of the challenge in how we develop those technologies, is get to those maximum operating points for the laser sources. Then that leaves us with the remaining challenge of we have to create the extra power that then immediately gets wasted in thermal losses. And those thermal losses are big drivers for the sizes of systems and impacts on system integration. Yeah. So research into creating those sources as efficiently as possible, and then dealing with the inefficiencies for platform integration. On the microwave side, we have some interesting dualities. There's typically 2 kinds of sources. There's vacuum devices that are relatively efficient and have been around for a long, long time. But they're also restricted in kind of how they operate. They tend to stay fixed at one frequency, or at least a fairly narrow band of frequencies, which means if the target you want to address doesn't respond to that, that's not useful. So we've got a lot of capability there. When we have particular targets we know we want to take on, and that's a reliable investment space. A holy grail for us is to get to solid state sources, not those that are driven by tubes, vacuum tubes. Solid state sources will give you the agility and flexibility to move across broader spectrum, frequency spectrum, but they're not as efficient, anywhere close to being as efficient as vacuum devices, and they're just not as technically mature as those technologies have been in the past. So those are really kind of where we end up focusing our interest, is the physics of getting more efficiency. And then you mentioned earlier the fact that we operate in certain spaces that are really defense specific.
Right.
So laser weapons rely heavily on optical systems to move that laser beam around and eventually put it on a target.
Yeah.
And there are many commercial and dual use applications of optical systems and components, but almost no commercial application for the intensity levels that we need to operate at with laser weapons.
Yeah.
So that's where you start driving into some unique research areas for us that we need to solve for some of the aspects we described earlier. If you put systems in the field and they fail, oftentimes they fail because the optical components don't hold up.
Yeah.
It's a tough environment. There's shock and vibe that maybe they don't see in laboratories, and those systems and components and coatings have to continue to maintain their ability to operate.
Yeah.
So a lot of focus in those areas.
Yeah. See, so now I feel like now I have some sort of a solution when people say, like, why don't we just have like tons of these right now, like shooting down shahads? If you have a power source that's capable enough, then that means deploying a massive power source someplace that might be a little bit tricky. And you also have incredibly precise optical things that don't like being dust and temperature and getting shot at and jerked around and on the back of a truck. So all of these things sort of contribute. I want to take a second with both of you to ask the question that's sort of always like comes to me when I write about things. And what does the supply chain look like in these areas? Are you okay with it? Is fiber lasers? I don't know. Are we talking about fiber optic things? And you mentioned vacuum tubes. Do we have a safe supply when we reach some of these thresholds to really scale up production in ways that are meaningful? First on directed energy across the three areas, and then I want to get into the hypersonic supply chain for a second.
For direct energy, it's a mixed bag, kind of a yes and no answer to that. So again, primarily on the laser weapon side, we have a substantial industrial base that is already capable of producing fiber lasers, for example, for industrial processes, cutting and welding. They're robust, they're rugged, they operate 24/7, or they wouldn't be supporting manufacturing processes. So that industrial base is capable of producing literally megawatts of those kinds of lasers per year. That industrial base is capable and is there. The advanced optical components is a different issue. Again, they're extreme versions of optical systems that no other application really needs. And we have a little bit of a catch-22 in our world that the industrial base and the supply chain for those, I think, is capable of producing them at the pace and quantities that we need, but we're not asking them to. We haven't committed those dollars. And so a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem of companies will invest in that supply chain when we give them the demand signal. Oftentimes we're concerned that they don't have the supply chain, so maybe we shouldn't be investing yet. So those are our challenges, I think primarily in the optical systems.
Okay.
That's where it's slower and kind of gets bottlenecked.
Okay. Yes, Jarrett. There's not a lot of commercial manufacturers of hypersonic glide bodies, I don't think. So it's like a little tricky. Yeah.
Not yet. So certainly in the department, we have a focus on industrial base that's in multiple parts of the department. Certainly the services all invest in the industrial bases that will deliver their programs. So that's certainly one place where we invest. But within OSD, OSD R&E has the manufacturing technology program, and there's a variety of initiatives there that aim to address some of the potential bottlenecks. So big ticket items for us are things like solid rocket motors. We need to make sure we have an industrial base that can produce those at scale, and the other notable source of complexity in manufacturing is heat shield and thermal protection technology. Mm-hmm. But there are others as well.
Okay.
And so one place to look again is the Manufacturing Technology Program and OSD R&E. And there's a couple offices in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment that speak to this as well. The Industrial Base Analysis and Sustainment Program, as well as our Defense Production Act Title III program.
Okay. So I want to stick with you for a second because yesterday, GAO put out a report. If you don't know GAO is great. We have definitely read all of their stuff. It's fantastic. They pointed out, and we wrote a story about this, and I think a lot of other people did too. Long-range hypersonic weapon system. It's the Army's one. Delayed testing until 2025. Real quick, can you just comment on that? What's going on there, and how are the services sort of doing in terms of their testing guidelines and aspirations?
Yeah, so perhaps a lot to unpack there. First, I don't want to give the impression that we're delaying testing. So we've already had first flight of the CPS LRHW missile within 4 years. I mentioned earlier of program start.
Okay.
We've flown the glide body as well. There's a cadence of testing that has to happen before you send an operational unit to the field, and that's ongoing right now. And we're frankly, I mentioned earlier, our job is to move fast, and that's exactly what we're doing. So we're moving as fast as we can on that. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the soldiers in the field already have the batteries, the transporter reactor launches, and associated ground equipment they've been rehearsing on.
Mm-hmm.
So that capability is well underway to the field, and we've had successful tests in other programs as well. Among them, the Aero program that I mentioned.
Right. So yes, if you're in the audience and you're part of the press and you wrote a story about thing yesterday and you want to write an update, then now you can go ahead, and if you have it, now your story is going to be better than everybody that wrote about it yesterday. So you're welcome. I want to stick with this though for a second, because one of the things that you mentioned, something in covering hypersonics for a long time, Walker used to talk about this when he was head of DARPA. There's digital engineering, there's digital twinning, and there's a lot of things you can do by running through highly complex, in-depth digital scenarios about what's going to happen with the missile. The U.S., at least a few years ago, and I think it's still the case, doesn't have the testing ranges for this thing. We are kind of behind, at least we were in 2017, we're behind China on places to their wind tunnels, just open fields where we can really do some of this testing. Is that still the case? How do you characterize our field and ranging physical testing environment for these things?
So we've certainly been working on a whole of nation approach to increasing our testing capability within the DoD as well as with our partners at NASA, at academic institutions, research institutions, private industry. Among the most interesting recent developments have been a program called MACH-TB, which is another complicated acronym, the Multi-Service Advanced Capability for Hypersonics Testbed,
okay.
Which is leveraging commercial rocket launches as well as sounding rockets to get us more flight opportunities per year to test technologies, including guidance, navigation, control, sensor seekers, get those payloads aboard those rockets at appropriate flight conditions to accelerate our ability to get systems to the field. The other really cool investment in my book is a system called SkyRange. It's converted RQ-4 Global Hawks and MQ-9 Reapers that are able to deploy. Traditionally, if you're going to go test in the open ocean,
right,
we often do. You have sometimes we call it a string of pearls, a set of ships that goes over the horizon to listen for telemetry and to make other observations, and a lot of these are manned platforms.
Yeah.
And so SkyRange and these drones, these converted drones, allow us to do that without as many people in the loop, allow us to do it in a more agile way, so we can more effectively utilize the ranges that we have. And so an example from recent months was deployment in the Atlantic.
Yeah.
10 days later, the same drones went out to the Pacific to support another test. Otherwise, traditionally that would have taken many weeks to accomplish.
Yeah. So you're just making the range. You're just using these drones to go out there and make the range in the ocean. That's cool. I had never even heard of that thing. We got 10 minutes or so. Directed energy, lasers, microwaves, hypersonics, questions. Courageous people want to know the future of these world-breaking technologies. Oh, here we go. Yes. Here, we'll get you a microphone. Sorry, pardon the delay. The rest of you, think about your question. Oh, we're getting the microphone. There we go. Yes.
I don't know if you can hear me. But I wanted to ask a follow-up question on the hypersonic flight testing. Congress has asked DoD to study hypersonic corridors, additional corridors for flight testing. What is the status of some of that work? What are some of the findings? What are some of the challenges? Can you speak a little bit to that option, I guess?
So I can speak broadly to, so our agent within the department for really addressing that sort of question is the Test Resource Management Center, and they could certainly give you a more full, wholesome answer than I think I could give you today. So I'd encourage you to talk to folks in the department. If you need help finding TRMC, well, I think they have a website, but also OSDPA can help you out there. But, we are certainly focused on getting our test capabilities up to substantially higher than they have been in prior years. Our goal is more than 50 flight tests per year, and a ground test capability of 3 to 5 times what we had in 2020. So I can't speak necessarily to a specific flight range, but obviously we have multiple of them and use them, as I mentioned, with Skyrange as effectively as we can.
Okay. Other courageous souls, brave people that want to engage the future. Here we go, right here, right in front.
Kate Jones, and I just came back from Ukraine, and I was talking a lot with them about the electronic warfare space. And obviously, both sides are using a lot of electronic warfare, which makes it very hard to fly a drone. And I'm wondering, particularly with looking at the electromagnetic spectrum, how are you doing your designs with the enemy in mind that might have a peer-to-peer capability?
That all for me?
You can take the first.
Yeah, so we are certainly tracking, developments that potential adversaries are imposing in terms of the contested battle space that they are that we're going to be subject to should there be a conflict that our forces are involved in. And I can't speak to specific capabilities, but I can assure you that we design to the threats that we not only know about but anticipate.
So for directed energy, we're actually doctrinally and by defense guidance part of electronic warfare or electromagnetic spectrum operations, if you will. The good news is we're really sort of secondarily affected by those kinds of challenges because we're primarily a terminal defense system. So we're already operating in proximity to bases or ships that bring their own capabilities to deal with adversary use of EW. Laser weapons, for example, as long as we can find a threat, and that requires radars and other sensors to be working, which is somebody else's problem to make happen. But assuming we can operate in that environment, then a laser weapon can find a target, can lock onto it visually, and at that point really is not affected by the EW techniques of an adversary. So for direct energy, it's really the larger question of how we're survivable in those environments in general.
So if you follow like the hypersonics news, right? Russia has already deployed these and uses them in Ukraine, mostly, I think, just to sort of as branding, as advertisement. They're not as relevant as some other things that they could be using there. China's done a very dramatic demonstration of hypersonic capability. Your thoughts on those programs? What role do they play in just the conversations that you have? Do you feel competitive with them, or do you feel like they're just after something that is not exactly what the Defense Department is towards, and so you don't feel like you're in a competition with China and Russia in terms of hypersonic development? How do you go about it?
So certainly, we acknowledge there is strategic competition generally with Russia and the PRC, but with respect to hypersonics, there's an impression out there that we're in some sort of an arms race, and I would say that we don't think about it that way. And so in terms of offensive systems, right, our defenses absolutely have to be designed to counter Russia and PRC offensive systems now and in the future. And so we are working on that. The Missile Defense Agency is working on that very diligently. With respect to offensive hypersonics, as I think I mentioned at the outset, the systems that we are developing are aimed at countering the expected anti-access area denial capabilities that we expect Russia and PRC to field in order to, I think they seek to deter us from coming to the assistance of our allies, partners, and U.S. forces abroad. And so the offensive hypersonic systems that we are developing are aimed at that goal, right? We're not in any kind of arms race with Russia or the PRC when it comes to offensive hypersonic systems. There's
a higher, like the Defense Department, the thing that they're making has to be more precise, right? Isn't that the part of the, across these systems, precision is more of an emphasis in what the Defense Department is pursuing than you see in, certainly, I think, the Russian platforms that have already been deployed. Does that add an extra challenge? Like, how does that seems like it would just make things much more hard.
So certainly when you're trying to strike a target from hundreds or thousands of miles away, going Mach 5 or higher, that is a challenge. There's no doubt about that. So precision, of course, is a big deal to us. And we need to make sure that, that we have, the computing systems on board, the guidance systems on board, that allow us to achieve that mission.
Okay. Last call for questions. Yep, here we go.
Mark Clements, Department of the Air Force. Dr. Peterkin, you mentioned particle beam. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more of its demise and possible future.
So I was not operating at the OSD level when Dr. Griffin kind of...
First, what is it that he's talking about?
Oh, okay. So particle beams. Basically, instead of using electromagnetic energy, whether it's lasers or RF, you're accelerating particles, atomic particles. You either strip off an electron, in which case they're charged, and that gives you certain advantages because you can bend them and direct them with magnetic fields. But that also gives you challenges because those same particles also tend to repel each other. And so from the physics standpoint, it's hard to maintain a charged particle beam going towards a target, especially over long distances.
Sounds like a marriage.
It kind of, yes. And then neutral particle beams are basically you find ways to accelerate the particles, but then put that electron back on. So now they do not carry a charge, which means they can stay tightly grouped together. And then when they impact a target, they can cause effects. It is not my personal technical background, just to be clear on particle beams, but the perspective over the last several decades when this has been looked at is lasers and microwaves are hard and particle beams are harder. And so when you look at spending your differential dollar in a technology space, so far you can see that we keep placing our bets on lasers and microwaves, and we keep a little bit, the burner's on a little bit for particle beams in various laboratories and industrial corners of the ecosystem, but we're not placing big bets on that today.
Yeah, that was the funnest thing about when Griffin just sort of opened that up. He just dropped this idea like it was this blasé thing. And what he's actually talking about is returning to a program that was briefly talked about in the 1980s where we're going to take a neutral particle beam in space. The thing had to be the size of a football field. And you needed like a lot of energy. And I'm like, wow. Anyway, it never happened, but great story. Super fun. Last, in a little bit of time we have left, we've kind of gone through all of the different physics challenges that you're facing and certainly some of the bureaucratic issues. Information technology, digital engineering is going to play a really important role in the development of other things we're going to talk about, and some important role in what you're doing. In the next couple of years, how do you want to use either digital engineering or digital twinning or simulations? How do you expect to use them to scale things up, design things better, and move them to finish line quicker?
I'll take a 30-second cut at that. So for us, physics is actually really helpful because we can reliably predict things like how lasers propagate, how electromagnetic energy moves through the atmosphere or even interacts with materials. And so the ability to create those digital models, those digital twins of the weapon systems themselves is highly advantageous for us because then we can marry up the physics models and have good expectations about how they'll perform. Mm-hmm. So that will only continue to be important and more important for us in direct energy. Also, that leads us down the road of possibly some commonality. Once we have digital engineering models and digital twins, we can drive architectures and offer those out to the industrial base and basically ask them to comply with those architectures, which helps with the supply chain issues and competitive aspects.
Awesome.
And so I'd say for us, the title of our session is the physics challenge. And physics helps us quite a bit with modeling and simulation too. And you've got Newton's laws; they help you quite a bit in actually predicting things like precision. So we have, actually for decades we've had exquisite models of how does a vehicle fly over long distances through trajectory models. We do this. We have exquisite models for computational fluid dynamics, for aerothermal modeling, et cetera, for structural modeling. So we have certainly a suite of digital engineering tools that allows us to design, and we're always looking to use those tools to design more iteratively and more quickly during the process. Certainly one challenge that we have, and one sort of perhaps competing set of objectives we have in the hypersonic space is because we want to move fast, sometimes we have to make the trade between how do you most fully adopt digital engineering and digital twinning while also moving fast. And as we acknowledge, as actually for those who track DoD instructions, there's DoD instruction 5000.97, which speaks, actually Undersecretary Hsu signed that out last year, that speaks to policies, procedures for executing digital engineering. Among its acknowledgments was the need for an ecosystem for digital engineering. So that's the hardware, the software, the people, and the networks. All of which have to work together and is an infrastructure you have to set up to execute a program. So we always are looking to balance taking advantage of all the tools we have in digital engineering and digital twinning with the challenge of also weighing that against the amount of infrastructure you have to set up for our really fast middle tier of acquisition programs. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So thank you so much. This gives me, first of all, I think it really helps to sort of tie the thread together between some of the things we're talking about with Maynard, micro technologies, next generation chips, things like that, distributed energy, large scale computation, and even artificial intelligence, and the role that plays in things that we don't associate with the digital world at all, bringing to the future next generation directed energy and hypersonics. So thank you so much for this window. I really appreciate it. And really, it's great.
Thank you.